Martha Dump Truck in the flesh. Here comes the cootie squad. We should shut up, Heather. Sorry, Heather. Look who's with her. Oh my God. Dang, dang, diggity, dang, 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 diggity, dang, dang.
Let's enjoy some entertainment before I start talking about political parties. So here you are. Dang, dang, diggity, dang. Enjoy your political party PowerPoint. Well, this is round two. Hopefully everybody's doing well. At this point, I've had my surgery, and I'm coming to give you a little bit of a lesson on political parties and the political spectrum. So hopefully this stuff's taking care of you. Hopefully you guys are doing well. But let's take your packets out. We'll take a look at the political spectrum, how political parties work, what separates Democrats from Republicans. Many of you took the quiz a couple of weeks ago about where you stand on the political spectrum. Now let's dive into the actual content to see what do Republicans, Democrats, and or independents stand for when it comes to the political parties. So obviously we're taking a look at the political spectrum right now. The political spectrum is only really correlated to American politics, not foreign politics, where in other countries they do have a multi-party system. Here we have a two-party system that has pretty much dominated politics. We do have other third parties. They have not been very successful in the political arena, and we'll talk about reasons why we get the third parties. But let's take a look at the political spectrum itself. So on the top, we do see left, right, and center. Okay, and we're not talking about the games that you play on the weekends, but we are talking about in the center. Okay, we talk about the Independent Reform Party. These are people that have moderate views as opposed to two extreme left and right views. Your left is Democratic or liberal leaning views, and your right is Republican leaning views. Now, if you go even further right and further left, you will see the Socialist or Green Party, which is a little more extreme left. When we say extreme, in comparison to foreign countries, we're not as extreme with our political spectrum. Okay, so for correlation to other countries, we're really not as extreme as a ideology as other countries are with multi-party systems. So Socialist, Green Party, Communist Party are some of the third parties that have evolved over time. The KKK has never evolved into an official party that ran a political platform, but obviously they have an ideological thinking which is more conservative than the Republicans. Okay, there's no comparison obviously from a Republican to a KKK member, but there is a correlation that you are a little more extreme in terms of ideological thinking. Then on the far right, you do have dictator, which is the most conservative we can get. And on the far left, you have anarchy, which is no hands on government intervention. Students get confused on this all the time, but obviously anarchy is pretty much no involvement. Okay. If you look at the political spectrum itself, it is clearly defined that it's an ideological thinking replacement. Okay, we took a quiz, 10-question quiz a couple weeks ago, and you've kind of found that most students were somewhere in the middle, which is kind of consistent with the American population itself. So if you look at these tags, okay, there's other tags that are thrown onto the left, right, and the center. In foreign nations, not so much in the US. Okay, if you continue looking at the left, obviously we talk about liberals correlating to change, promoting change, ideas of working with the middle class and the working class and the poor. Okay, they kind of protect the common man as their objective and goal. Okay, whether they do that in reality is up to be determined. And then government is the protector, not the oppressor. The job of government is to protect the American public, not to oppress them, hold them down, okay, and use that philosophy. So liberals obviously choose change. They promote equality. Radicals are dissatisfied with the current existing order and kind of want to throw the current political spectrum out. Then anarchy obviously is completely no respect for authority, no laws, and at least total chaos, which we do see in other countries, but we have not seen here in the US over the last 250 years. So if you look at philosophies or beliefs of the left, okay, they believe in government held by the common man. Okay, they try to level out the playing field so everybody has that equality of opportunity we've been talking about in class. If you look at in terms of letting people decide their own morality, it's not the government to choose the morality or morals of the American public, it's really the people that decide. When it comes to taxing, okay, the economy, it's tax the rich and redistribute that money to the poor and to the middle class. In terms of constitutional rights, they're really preserving constitutional rights. They don't want to infringe upon them. The government shouldn't really impede upon those rights as such, which kind of contradicts their Second Amendment right theory with gun control right now. And then obviously in terms of military spending, they tend to promote smaller military spending as opposed to larger military spending. It does not mean they don't support the military. It basically means that they are wanting to use the budgetary constraints of what we have and put it towards social welfare programs. Okay, continuing with the left, in terms of the use of force, less willing to commit in the Middle East and North Korea. Okay, they're pro-choice when it comes to the abortion topic. In terms of church and state, they support the notion of separation of church and state. They do not believe they should be working together. Same-sex marriage they do support, which obviously became a reality nationwide with the Oglethorpe case in 2015, which we'll talk about later in the year. In terms of crime, we should solve the problem, okay, which leads to the crime. So rehabilitation is some things that they tend to promote. Defendants' rights, obviously you should have every right to an attorney, every right guaranteed by you under the Constitution. And the right's going to be totally opposite. So this is an easy topic to remember. If you can get the left, you should be able to easily get the right as well. So the tag here is conservative, okay, which does not mean that every Republican or somebody that belongs to the Republican Party supports the notion of being that conservative, because some people are in the middle, remember. But they want less government involvement, hands-off, laissez-faire, okay? When it comes to supporting businesses, let the businesses and supply and demand control the economy, not the individual government, okay? They should have really no hands in the government, no hands in the economy from the government itself. And obviously they preserve traditional rights, restricting, even if it restricts some freedom. So that's where their same-sex marriage issue is. That's where there is issues with abortion, because they believe preserving traditional values of individuals over government intervention. So it should be a state right, not a federal right. Okay, obviously the conservative tag, if it works, leave it alone. Why do we fix it? This was the premonition, obviously, that Herbert Hoover had, which we know, obviously in the late 1920s failed. Go to charity, figure it out on your own. Didn't work in economic turmoil, but this is a philosophy that sometimes works, sometimes doesn't, depends upon the economic climate. Reactionary people that respond, they want to go back to the old way, and obviously you have your dictator, which is going back to the single control of one person over government. Now, if you continue with the right, okay, it's the opposite of the left. Smaller and less government in people's lives, strong work ethic instead of obviously government intervening, it's the people's work ethic. Believe in traditional values, and that brings back morality in society. So the idea of going to attend religious functions, morals have been lost, the government is interfering too much. Cutting taxes across the board, okay, it gives people more money. If you have more money in your pockets, you're willing to spend that money, and that's kind of the trickle-down theory, okay, that Republicans utilize with the economy. Okay, if you cut taxes across the board, hopefully people take that money and they spend it. Constitutional rights can be temporarily sacrificed, especially during national crisis. Okay, these are all the opposite, like I said before. And then peace through strength, okay, preserving military and strong military for protection of the American border. Now, the right also believes in the use of force in terms of where they stand. They were more willing to commit troops. Obviously, we know that President Trump just pulled troops out of Syria, so it kind of defied the Republicans' desire to protect us externally outside the country. They are pro-life for the most part. Does not mean that every single Republican pigeonholes themselves into this category. We know that there's more moderate Republicans as well. There is separation of church and state. They kind of oppose it. They're thinking that morals should be aligned with some government intervention. And you may or may not disagree with that. Same-sex marriage, they do oppose. Now, since the Oglethorpe case, this has kind of become a non-entity for the Republicans because they haven't really pushed the issue because the Supreme Court has decided that it is legal across all 50 states. Now, in terms of crime, enforce the law, punish the criminals. Rehabilitation doesn't work. Okay, once you rehabilitate, the same problem takes place. They get out of jail, they end up back in jail. The defendant's rights are important, but obviously the victims do have rights too, and we do need to preserve the Justice Department in terms of the police department. Then our last one obviously is looking at the center. Okay, this is their modern stance. Most of you fit into this category. We took the quiz. So most Americans fit here, but we don't really have a party that correlates to the center. Okay, so they kind of take beliefs from their left and from the right, and they infuse those beliefs into what we call the center. Most Americans fall into the moderate category. Okay, obviously liberals and conservatives, we know those tags kind of differ on their philosophical understanding of the economy, political, economic, and social aspects of the American life. So now take a look at political parties. We're not going to do this whole PowerPoint today. I'm going to go through about 20-25 minutes, and then you'll move on to your next activity. So the purpose of political parties, okay, in essence, is people with a common interest. So like many of you that have joined clubs in Kings Park High School, National Honor Society, or Honor Society, the Model UN, and several other clubs you belong to, you have a common interest with those people. That's why you join the club, okay, and that's why you're successful in what you do in the club. But the purpose of a political party with a common interest at hand is to, number one, and I want to highlight this and start whatever you want to do, is to win elections and control the government. Okay, so we know this political strife, we know there's polarization left and right, okay, currently, but if you think about the major function of political parties is to win an election. So therefore, can we blame the political parties or do we blame the people for why we're at such a polarized state right now? Now, It's not required for you to join a political party, but we know when I go to register you to vote in a couple weeks, that you will have to register Democrat, Republican if you want to vote in the primaries. We're a closed primary state here, which we'll talk about later when we get to campaigns, nominations, and elections. But this is where kind of people are frustrated. Why should I have to register for a party that I don't belong to? Okay, I fit in the middle, but yet I have to pick left or right, which is why people get concerned, and why most citizens, whether lacking education about government or not, feel like they don't want to pigeonhole themselves into a party. Now, if you take a look at identification, it's played pretty consistent over time. So this was a stable distribution up until the 1990s, where we saw it was kind of a mix. We saw a major jump in independence because mostly from 1970 on, you'll see a little bit of a spike. The Vietnam War. The Vietnam War caused a lot of divisiveness in this country. People were frustrated with government and they decided to jump ship and basically say, I don't belong to one of the major two parties. I don't support the war of Vietnam. So I think government's making the wrong decision. So we saw a spike in independence rise. Now, that does not mean people vote independent. They'll vote Republican or Democrat because they're still loyal to their party. But the independent label as to people identifying as independent has been on the rise since the 1970s. And mostly because of Watergate and Vietnam, corruption in government under Watergate and Vietnam War. Many people at that time did not support the war, or the reason why we went into the war, I should say, not the war itself. Now, you do need to know these AP tests. They're going to ask you a question about functions of political parties. Okay, which of the following is the major function of political parties? This is pretty important. So if you take a look at functions, the main function is to nominate candidates. Okay, they're recruiting people, choosing their officers. If you notice, we had 13 people in the Democratic Party. We're dwindling down at this point to 10, and people are dropping out of the race. Once they get the nomination, okay, they've got to become and inform their supporters of what they stand for. Right now, the Democrats have kind of put those 10 people or 12 people up on the panel. They're kind of very similar philosophy on healthcare, on abortion, on same-sex marriage, on the economy. So now they got to start to separate themselves before the January primaries to figure out how do we know the difference between Biden, Warren, and the other candidates that are running. So if you look at, they do act as a bonding agent, so they kind of bring people together. We know they're worthy of the seal of approval to become the president of the United States. Their job is to govern. Okay, basically they're supposed to kind of get the party together and to ally, not to be too divisive. And then this is one of the bigger functions, acting as a watchdog. This election cycle, they are obviously proving that President Trump did not do a good job, and that's the watchdog function that's been taking place for the last 3 years or so. Okay, they're trying to prove that, hey, he is not worthy of the presidency, and that they are. They gave us a laundry list of reasons why he should not be president, and that's something they've utilized as a watchdog function as the party. So the Republican and Democratic parties over time watch the opposing party, and they kind of hash to the American public what they don't like about that party so they can hopefully win the election. Okay, their main function obviously is to get elected into office, okay? But this kind of goes along the same lines as what we just mentioned. They're there to educate their voters. This is through campaigns, newspapers. They're traveling all around the country right now doing this. They're trying to simplify political choices. So instead of having 45 Democrats, we have 13, which is still a major choice. And we know that Americans don't like choices. We'd like to have just 2 people, okay? But obviously, many people want to run for political office. Now, their job is to operate the government, okay? We just talked about the watchdog function. Okay, they want to prove the opposing party is not loyal enough to be president or senator, House or Rep member, and that's kind of what their job is to do. Okay, now if you look at different election cycles, in 1912, okay, we saw Teddy Roosevelt, okay, kind of dropped from the Republican label and formed the Bull Moose Party. Okay, he was pretty successful in doing so. He received about 28% of the popular vote as a third-party member, but it was more progressive. Third parties do bring something to the table, which we'll get to a little bit later in the week. But if you look at it, 1932 presidential election, FDR swept across the country, 472 electoral votes, okay, out of, 472 electoral votes total, 59 came from Herbert Hoover. So if you look at the significance around the country, okay, we know we have 538 total electoral votes, 270 win. He got 472. So he kind of swept this election, took most of the country by storm. And Herbert Hoover, because of his, I think it was a critical election in 1932, so he didn't do a good enough job, and people did not want to re-elect him. Now, if you look at Ronald Reagan, similarly, okay, in 1984, there's no minor parties here, so he sweeps through the American population, 525, one of the biggest landslides in the Electoral College. 59% of the popular vote to 41%. He won 54 million votes to Walter Mondale's 13. Now, if you look at 2004 election, okay, obviously red versus blue, red indicating Republican, blue indicating Democratic. So even though he took most of the Midwestern states in the South, okay, he won 286 to 251. Okay, look at the popular vote. Okay, there's some questions about this. It's only 4%, 4 million votes off, but it was a pretty tight race compared to the election we just looked at. Okay, this is the last election of 2016. So if you notice, kind of President Trump swept through the South, some of the Midwest. Hillary Clinton took the East Coast and the West Coast for the most part, especially northern parts. And we know that Wisconsin was a major one with 10 electoral votes that she kind of ignored as to reason why she might have lost the election. He wins 306 electoral votes to 232. Now, why do we have a two-party system? Okay, well, historical basis of this is that it's history. Okay, we've had two parties all along. We're not changing this. It worked pretty well. Why are we going away from it? Some of you may say, get rid of the two-party system and let anybody run for office, but if you look at it, it's the basis of history. Unfortunately, Federalists versus Anti-Federalists were considered to be the first major breaking point. Anti-Federalists cannot really be considered a political party because they never ran a candidate for office. Okay, but they did become the Democratic Republicans at first. Now, because of tradition, okay, this is a popular question on the AP test. They ask about why a two-party system? Why do we not move forward from a two-party system? And basically, minor parties lack political support, lack money, lack support, lack the attention of the American public because we want a clear-cut winner of over 50%, and we know third parties have never done that. So we consider them a wasted vote, and most people don't vote third party. Now, understanding the electoral process itself, okay, we want the two best candidates to be pushed forward to the presidency, especially, or to any election cycle. Anything other than that is considered a wasted vote, okay, so that's why we always go with Democrats versus Republicans. Now, understand this, and you can highlight this because this comes up quite often in the AP test, okay? A single-member district is basically one candidate wins, okay? And we like this system, okay, because in every election, one candidate wins the election. This is called, and we borrowed this from England, single-member districts. It's designed to favor a two-party system. So because we have this, it's another barrier for third parties to get into the actual arena. Now, here's the question. Do Americans want a plurality or a majority vote? Americans that get elected in office, we want a majority vote. We do not want a plurality because that's under 50%, and that proves the American public didn't want this person overwhelmingly, okay, over the other. Now, plurality vote in all elections is the candidate that wins, just needs more votes than the others. Okay, this takes place in the Senate and the House of Reps. In the presidential election, we'd like to see over 50%. Now, Clinton won by 48% okay, in 1992. It's because Ross Perot was a third-party candidate, and he took votes away from the major two parties. Okay, we love a winner-take-all system, which the winner gets all the votes, and it's just something we've stuck with. The winning candidate wins the election with 50% of the vote or more. We're very comfortable with that, and it's a cut-cloth reason why candidates win, and we're very comfortable with that system. And because of historical tradition. Okay, now going to consensus, okay, in terms of ideological consensus, if you look at it, a general agreement amongst these issues is what separates Democrats and Republicans. Okay, so some people, people on the right, tend to believe that taxation should be from a cut across the board, where Democrats believe that should be a redistribution policy. So we generally have a consensus on what we believe. So here's kind of the breakdown of the Federalists versus Anti-Federalists, okay, and it has not changed much over time. Look, Alexander Hamilton had wealth, had some money. He's a Federalist, okay. Generally, this would correlate maybe to today's Republican Party, but you really can't compare the two because the issues have changed so drastically over time. Upper class, wealthy, strong leadership. You can evolve into the modern day Republican Party, but you can even question this today. Liberal interpretation of the Constitution, didn't want a Bill of Rights added, whereas Thomas Jefferson, okay, kind of represented the common man. Okay, talked about a government for the people, by the people. Strict interpretation of the Constitution, so whatever it said we should follow. And you would probably consider that the Democratic Party of today, but again, the comparison is very difficult. Now, these are the major factors that kind of separate Democrats and Republicans. Okay, where do your party membership lie? Family, major events, economic status, religion, occupation, and age. Here's the evolution of the two-party system. Federalists went from the Federalists to the Whigs to the Republicans. Ironically, the Anti-Federalists went to the Democratic Republicans to the Republicans, not the way we know them today, to the current Democratic Party. And kind of here's the history and evolution of the American two-party system over time. So from 18 to 1860, you saw a Democratic domination of all but two presidential elections. Okay, the Whig Party comes about, it declines pretty quickly in the 1850s, and only two presidents are elected from the opposing party. The Republican Party is founded in 1854, so here's the first contest against the Democratic Party. From 1860 to 1932, we see dominance of the Republican Party. So you see major shifts in party loyalty over time. Republicans dominate all but 4 presidential elections. Okay, the Civil War kind of fractures the Democratic Party, and the return of the Democrats come back in 1932 with the Great Depression and the critical election of 1932, which is FDR. Okay, up until 1968, and since 1968, we've kind of seen the party system divided. We go between Democrats and Republicans, okay, and we kind of divide the government, which we'll talk about in a second. So Democrats dominate all but 2 presidential elections. Obviously, Democrat FDR is elected for 4 consecutive terms. Now, to quickly just finish up with this, since 1968, Democrats and Republicans have not dominated the presidency. We've kind of gone back and forth, and it's controlled by the opposing parties. So 68 to 76, Republicans hold the presidency, Congress is controlled by Democrats. This is called actually a divided government, where we kind of want that balance. We want one party in the presidency, another party in Congress, or vice versa. 1976, 1980, you did have Democrats controlling both, okay, only for a 4-year period, if you notice. 80 to 92, Republicans hold the presidency, Senate's controlled by the Republicans, and then they're controlled by the Democrats, so we're kind of flopping back and forth here. And the same from 92 to 2000, Democrats hold the presidency, and the Republicans hold Congress. So we kind of want today a balance. If the Democratic president is in office, most of the time you'll see the opposing party potentially could be holding the chambers of Congress. Republicans hold the presidency, the Republicans hold from 2000 to 2006, and now we've seen a divided government again in 2018. So if you look at the party structure, this is a popular question that comes up also. Democrats and Republicans have decentralized party organizations, which basically means that at the national level, Democratic Party deals solely with themselves. You have a state level committee and a local level committee. They rarely work together. Decentralization means that the party on the national level is worried about the national elections. They will promote state and local elections, but for the most part, they're worried about the federal elections. State, same thing, and on the local committee, it's the same side. Now, obviously, there's this thing called the National Committee. They will have you decipher difference between committee, convention, all these other terminologies. So these are terms you're going to need to know. National Committee provides leadership, direction between elections, puts up a national convention every 4 years, and they're kind of looking at between the elections, what are we doing? What's our platform? Okay, this goes to drawing up the political platform. What are the goals? What are the principles that we stand for? Democrats had to come up with something consistent because they lost the election in 2016, so trying to revitalize themselves, trying to separate themselves from the Obama administration, trying to separate themselves from Hillary Clinton because she lost the election. So how are they going to be different and add to the political climate with their core beliefs and core values? Now, just understand, you're going to have to memorize these terms, unfortunately. When we talk about a critical election, let's talk about this first. Okay, we see a critical election in 1860. All of a sudden, Democrats dominate the presidencies from the beginning of 1789 up until 1860 for the most part, all but 2. All of a sudden, in 1860, we see a civil war, economic issue of slavery. Republicans dominate from 1860 to 1932, so it's a shift in party loyalties, the critical election. Lincoln wins. 1896, we see another one, okay, which is the gold versus silver standard. That's the stuff we did with Mr. Kieran last year with The Wizard of Oz, okay, that whole allegory on The Wizard of Oz. Should we have gold or silver be our standard of economic value? Then 1932, the Great Depression hits, and now people don't like the past administration of Herbert Hoover's initiative of do-it-yourself. They like to vote in FDR, who then has work programs to help the American people. So the critical election of 1860, 1896, and 1932 are basically where people started to, because of an economic issue, shift their loyalty to another party. So if they were Republican, they vote Democrat. If they were Democrat, they vote Republican. Okay, and that happens in 3 different critical time periods throughout the U.S. history. Now, a party machine is illegal now, but it used to be one party dominating on the local level. So like the town of Smithtown, Republicans would dominate or Democrats would dominate, and they'd obviously influence other people to do so, to vote their people into power. Now, because of a critical election, you generally see an electoral realignment, okay, which is basically people shifting their party loyalties from one party to another. Generally happens after a critical election. An electoral de-alignment is basically the parties aren't really of value anymore. They become less important. You'll see this more on the local level because if you have a neighbor that's a Republican and you're a Democrat, but he's running for town supervisor, he's running for town sanitation advisor, you see an electoral de-alignment where the party really doesn't mean much. It's more about the person that's running for the office. Okay, now just to finish up quickly, okay, after the National Nominating Convention, okay, which is where they nominate their candidates for office, they start to raise funds for the candidates, promote the party through the media, obviously, and obviously help the president get elected, or senators or House rep members. It's not always just the president. Okay, now in terms of recent trends, The number of Republicans and Democrats combined each year exceed independents. Obviously makes sense. Even though maybe most people label themselves independent, they're voting Democrat or Republican. Number of Democrats exceeds those of Republicans, but maybe in certain elections they aren't voting as often. Okay, number of Democrats has shrunk over time. It does benefit the Republicans and the independents. African Americans and Jews are linked to the Democratic Party, which we've talked about in class. People of low education, low income tend to support the Democratic Party. We'll talk about reasons why when I get back. Women tend to vote Democratic more than Republican. Midwestern and Southerners tend to align themselves with moral values, traditional values, and that family value. So they tend to vote more Republican than Democratic. Does not mean that everybody in these categories votes this way. Okay, so just take that into account. Youngest group votes independent or will vote liberal. Okay, so a lot of younger people tend to align themselves with the independent party. Mid-20s to mid-40s would be heavily Republican because that's the maturization process. They're establishing they're getting taxed by the federal government. They don't want the taxes being taken out. Maybe they have a mortgage. Maybe they have stuff they're paying back. So they're seeing the process of the government and taxation being taken out. And the oldest group tends to be strongly Democratic for social welfare programs. We'll talk about this because we tend to think regionally as opposed to nationwide. You may say my grandparents are conservative, you live in a conservative region. Think about all 50 states when you come up with your opinion on how you think people vote. These are statistics that actually prove it. Okay, and then the last thing is when you gain office, okay, president, senate, or House of Rep member, there are 4 principles of responsible party government, a new term you need to know. Parties should have clear and consistent programs. Okay, so if they're coming about to the presidency and they've created all these this wish list when they ran for president, they better follow through. Okay, same thing. Voters should choose candidates on the basis of the party's program. Okay, the winning party should carry out its program when in office. So obviously, whatever you pledged, you should follow through with. We know this is not always feasible, especially in the recent climate. And past climates too. You promise things, you win an election, therefore you get to become the president, and you realize, oh, I can't do this because the opposing party's in office in Congress. And then voters should hold the governing party responsible in the next election. So will we see the voters in 2020 hold President Trump responsible if this impeachment inquiry actually comes to fruition? Not to say it will, okay, or it has, but if it does, and there's some evidence that he did create a high crime, will the voters go and there will be backlash at the polls? Okay, the same thing happened with Clinton in 1996, 97. Okay, if you look at the 96 election for Clinton, okay, he had an alleged affair. He was impeached, okay, by the U.S. Congress, but he was never removed from office. So there was some backlash at the polls because in the 1998 election, midterm election, some Republicans were voted into the Senate and to the House, which could have been backlash from the impeachment process. So hopefully that takes you through Democrats and Republicans. You better understand it. Hopefully I'll be back soon. But again, please take care of the sub. Okay, hope everybody's doing well, and I'll see you soon.